Hello and welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. My name is Heather. So we have something to chat about today, and I have a little bit of work to do in the greenhouse today, so I'm gonna combine the two into one. I want to apologize ahead of time. The army base right behind our house is doing a little bit of training, so you're gonna hear some bangs and some booms. There's nothing I can do about it, it's just part of life here, so we're going to proceed regardless. So there's something that I've heard quite often lately in the homesteading community, and that's this idea that if you grow your own food, all you're really doing is trading your grocery bill for like a feed bill or for like a compost and garden bill. And while I do see that being true on a very surface level, I do have a little bit of a gripe with it, and I wanted to kind of pick your brain and also see what you think and what your experience is with this. When we bought this farm initially, it came with the barn, it came with one of the garden spaces, and it came with a chicken coop. And a lot of these outbuildings that are here were already here when we bought, and many buildings, to include the barn and the chicken coop, came equipped with electricity. So it makes things a little bit easier when you have some of those systems and things in place, but it's absolutely not necessary in order to be successful in this life, not at all. These things are really nice conveniences. You don't need that much stuff, and you don't even need that much space or this much space in order to make a decent dent in your grocery bill, a noticeable dent. And I'm talking about a type of dent in the grocery bill that isn't simply just a transfer of cost. So we definitely don't grow everything that we eat here. We grow a whole lot of the important things, the staples. But every single week we make our way to our local discount Amish grocery store and we buy cereals, rice, pastas, mostly grain related things, chips, snack foods, stuff like that. It's not really, life sustaining things, but it's a lot of really nice things to have on hand, just supplementary. We've been buying a lot of fruit there, and we buy things. They don't have a lot as far as produce is concerned, but they do have mushrooms basically every week, and they have carrots and onions pretty reliably. We used to spend $600 at the grocery store every week, and I think that's when we had 3 kids. This was high quality food. We used a lot of goat milk products, which are very expensive in the store, and we used to buy a lot of organic. Nowadays, we spend half that on the feed bill plus the grocery bill. And those groceries that I told you about, they're not really necessary. Like, we could cut that way back and still get by really comfortably. And so $300 every week is kind of a broad estimate if we just bought basically everything that we wanted. Now, when we used to spend that $600 at the grocery store, that did not include anything for preservation. I didn't buy bulk amounts of things that would last us a few months. That was the week-to-week food that we bought. With our budget now, we're growing food that to eat fresh, of course, but there's so much of it in such an abundance that we put most of it away for a later date, which in turn is going to reduce the cost that we need to spend at the grocery store later. Our costs going into the food that nourishes our family are a lot cheaper with a farm and growing it ourselves than when we used to buy the same caliber of food at the grocery store. When you buy from the grocery store, you're absolutely buying for convenience because you don't have to put in all of the work that it takes for the food that gets there, that gets to the grocery store. The grocery store food doesn't just spontaneously arrive. Somebody had to grow it. And usually the costs that you see at the store are a result of that convenience. So the difference is we are making up that cost when we don't have to pay in money. We are paying with our time and physical energy here. So you'll hear a lot of people saying that homesteading and farming is the slower way of life. They yearn for a slowdown from the city life to go out into the country and live a more peaceful, slow existence. And I understand the thought behind that. It's a lot less fast-paced. You are kind of forced to do things like I'm doing right now, to sit and weed something, and there's something really therapeutic and healing about this way of life. But I think another cool way very accurate way to look at this being the slow life. It's also the slow way to stock your pantry, honestly. Especially when you first get started. I mean, it's much faster to go to the grocery store to stock your pantry than it is to grow it. No matter what, the squash seed takes about 65 days to get from seed to maturity, where it's going to start producing squash. And the dairy goat, the babies, they take 5 months to be developed inside of their mother before she can give birth and then in turn give you her excess milk. That takes time, and that's the slow life. It's putting in the work on the front end for the hope of a return on the back end. And normally there is quite a good return for the investment. Sometimes, not always, but most of the time there is. So we grew black-eyed peas in this greenhouse this summer, and I got, I think it was 10 quarts worth of dried peas out of this space over the course of, goodness, 5 months? So just about every month I would get a half gallon of beans out of the greenhouse. I amended the rows, I planted the seeds, I trellised up the plants, I harvested the plants, I shelled the peas for 5 months to get what I could buy at the grocery store for $50. And was it worth it? Absolutely. Absolutely. This thing, this homestead life, is a lot bigger than dollar signs. There's a lot more to be gleaned from this life than just impacting your grocery budget. Now, this video is about how homesteading can and does affect your grocery budget, but know that it's a lot bigger than that. Those same black-eyed peas, we hand shelled them. And this is the slowdown at work again. Those same black-eyed peas I got to shell with my husband, and we got to spend quality time shelling these peas because we had to. I mean, we grew it, we want the food. That's the work that we have to put in order to get the food, and it forced the slowdown in order to obtain what we wanted, and it was a great excuse for quality time. So there's benefits there that you just can't put a price tag on. But this video is mostly about the price tag, so we'll get into that conversation. When you first start looking into growing your own food, there really can be a sticker shock when you see some of the prices of some of the things that you may need to start the project that you want to start. Whether it be gardening, growing chickens, growing your own beef, there is an upfront cost normally. There doesn't always have to be. Like, you can look into foraging, and if you've got a nice plot of land, there really might be a lot of food sitting out there just waiting for you to have the knowledge to go out and get it and then be able to use it. And so in the short term, the price at the grocery store can seem more worth it than the price of starting up a project that really might not have a follow-through. Sometimes jumping into something like growing your own food can be kind of scary because you don't really know what lays on the other side. A lot of people don't feel qualified. I can tell you that you are qualified. If I can do this, you can do this. I know it. But here's the thing, and I've talked about this in a previous video where I talked about if dairy goats are worth it, and I will link that video at the end of this one. But when you're looking at the produce or the meat or whatever at the grocery store, trying to assess the cost of that versus what it costs to grow at home potentially, you need to weigh out what you're really looking at the grocery store. So with something like zucchini, any kind of produce, in general, produce loses about 15 up to 55% of its nutritional value within 48 hours after it being picked. And most things that you're going to find at the grocery store, unless you've got some local vendor that's got a really quick turnaround rate from field to store, you're going to be buying food that is literally of lesser quality simply because of when it was picked, regardless of how it was grown. So when you're comparing costs, don't forget that your zucchini has more value because of its nutritional content. I mean, that is why we eat food, to nourish our bodies, and homegrown food genuinely does it better. If you are concerned about seeing a quick decrease in your grocery budget by growing things at home. I think the fastest way to see a return on that is to grow herbs. And of course, that is only if you actually use herbs in cooking. And if you're not, I really think you should, because there's a lot that you could be missing out on, not only with the flavor, but also nutritionally. There's a lot of herbs that have a lot of really great nutritional benefits for us. And most of the time, you don't even need land to grow herbs. You don't even need anything but a sunny window for most herbs. So let's think about the upfront cost that might be associated with buying, the things that you might need for a windowsill herb garden. Well, if you're already buying things like yogurt or sour cream at the grocery store, those vessels are plant pots. Those are plant pots. You can absolutely use those. You just poke a hole in the bottom and use the lid as kind of a saucer so you don't get your windowsill wet when you water. And you've got the pot part of it taken care of. You've already paid for it with your regular groceries. So let's say you don't have access to like free compost or anything. And maybe you don't have friends who have seeds to share, or you're not part of like a seed swap kind of thing. You have to buy soil and seed. Let's just say that that's your upfront cost. Very, very likely you'll be paying off the investment of those seeds and that soil in a matter of months, and then your plants won't stop growing as long as you keep harvesting and keeping those plants healthy and watered and with good sunlight. Most herbs, they produce for a very, very long time, and you will be reaping the benefits of free food. And of course, food that you're growing at home doesn't affect your grocery budget. And when you have that little bit of wiggle room in your grocery budget, you're able to kind of put that towards something else, because you're no longer buying that. That money is now available to maybe invest into something else that can support sustainability for you. And it kind of snowballs like that, and it can happen pretty fast, especially if you have the mindset to making it work. What I would invest in at that time, most likely to make things work in a sustainable way, is I would invest in a pet rabbit. I think every gardener needs a pet rabbit, because what they take in inputs is very minimal, especially if you have a little bit of forage around your house to help supplement them in their diet. Those guys are fertilizer machines. And so if you combine the manure from the rabbit with food scrap that are already being thrown away from the kitchen, with things like sticks and leaves and grass clippings from the lawn, you have yourself a little compost operation. You can then turn around and grow more plants with that, and it just gets bigger and bigger. Do you see how the snowball happens? I think in order for systems like that to work well, you have to go about it with intention. You have to be very mindful about what your goals are, and be able to not just see the short term for what it is, but have a dream for the long term that you are willing to stick out. A lot of things on a homestead do take a little bit of upfront investment. Definitely not everything, and you can work the snowball, just like I talked about before, to make things work. An example of something much bigger is my friends Megan and Reagan grow their own beef cattle on their homestead. I think they're working on their third steer that they have grown at home. And they've got a really awesome system going right now with one strand of polywire and an electric energizer. And I was speaking to Reagan about what his costs were. And he very graciously shared with me that from purchase of the animal, through caring for that steer through its life, and then butchering and then selling half, their costs for their beef and their freezer, which will be about, he said, 212 pounds, give or take, for the half beef, is about just less than $5 per pound. I think he said $4.78 per pound for his homegrown beef. Now, I looked it up a little bit earlier, and it looks like that's about the mid-range for ground beef at Walmart right now in our area. And what they're going to be putting in the freezer is way more than ground beef. There is a lot of ground when you have your own animals processed, but then there's all the nice cuts, like all the steaks, all the roasts, the tenderloin, things like that. All of that is included in that $4.78 a pound that it took to raise. So obviously, when you take the entire half cow into account, and the fact they were able to sell half the cow in order to make their costs more manageable, it is worth it. And it can be worth it. So maybe while they're growing out the steer, it's kind of difficult until they get to the processing point of the animal. But once all of that beef is in the freezer, then beef doesn't have to be purchased at the grocery store, and that money can be allocated into something else. So not only is that steer something that is genuinely costing them less overall, it's something that they know exactly the cost or exactly the inputs that that animal had and exactly what it didn't have inputted into it. And there's a value in that you can't quantify, that there's not a dollar amount assigned to, that really you can't ignore. So that's an example of an animal that is so large that a lot of people cannot butcher them at home. A lot of people have to take their cows to a processor, but if you were able to process it at home, you could save on processing costs. And then the beef would be even cheaper because you're paying with your own labor. And that's the point of it all. That's usually where the cost is made up. As I mentioned, you're paying for convenience at the grocery store, and what you're not paying for with money at the homestead, you're usually paying for with physical labor. Here on our homestead, we do raise meat as well. My husband Levi hunts, and so do Megan and Reagan, but the majority of the red meat that we consume here is venison. My husband Levi has been very fortunate to where our neighbor allows us to hunt in his backfield, and there's quite a deer population back there, so he's been able to get 3 good-sized deer every year. And for us, the deer costs the price of a bullet as far as money out of our pockets. Now, we do process the deer here ourselves, and so there's no extra money put into that, besides a little bit of money that goes into, you know, the Ziploc bags and butcher paper and things to put it away. That cost is real and does exist, but it's negligible compared to what you're receiving out of that animal. Now, before we had a homestead, my husband did have a gun collection. He already did reloading, so that is something we came into our homestead life with, and that's not something that we had to get extra in order to hunt. If it was, that would be something that would be an upfront cost in order to reap the benefits that would then pay off with time. And the fact that things do take time on a homestead is one reason that I think you really have to have the mindset for it. I think if you're wanting a quick turnaround, a quick return on your investment, that you might be kind of upset and it might be easy to quit, especially if things don't work out. I know some people who have purchased dairy cows and then had a hard time getting them bred, and it's a lot of money to pay to feed an animal and get no return on it for quite a length of time. Those things do happen, but usually in a homestead setting, there's something else on the homestead that is doing awesome, that is helping make up that cost. Another meat that we eat a lot of here from our homestead is rabbit. One bag of rabbit feed, 50-pound bag, for us is about $18. And that one $18 bag will raise from, you know, about 2-week-old kit to butcher size 3 rabbits. So it costs about $6 per rabbit to get them to butcher size, and we butcher them ourselves. So at the end of the day, it costs $2.40 per pound to put rabbit in the freezer. And that $2.40 is half the cost of what rabbit meat costs at Kroger right now. Kroger is a store that has sold rabbit meat in the past, and so has Publix upon request. But from what I hear, a lot of them don't have it because it's hard to get right now. So it's another one of those commodities that's hard to really place a value on because there's nothing that really compares to it. A lot of people try to compare rabbit to chicken, but they have a distinctly different flavor and texture and really different nutritional benefits for you. Chicken absolutely has its place. There are arguments for rabbit being a little bit healthier. I guess that depends on what you consider healthy. Some people say that, you know, rabbit is lower fat, that means it's healthier. I don't necessarily believe that. Schmaltz is a very good and very valid fat nutritionally for your body. It's a good thing. Fat's good. Don't be afraid of it. So as I mentioned, venison makes up the majority of the red meat that we eat, but we also do raise intentionally excess dairy goats to butcher and eat as well. We try our best to raise those goats for the majority of their lives out on pasture. They do get a little bit of extra grain when we just feed the entire barn, and most of the meat goats just have as much of their mama's milk as they want. And there's usually actually a little bit extra milk for us as well. And it's a nice thing to be able to do because it feels free. There is a little bit of input because they are eating a little bit of grain, especially when we take them into the winter, but it's negligible. I was talking to one of my friends today. She lives in Arizona, and she was trying to buy a goat butchered. She's trying to buy the goat meat. And she was quoted $275 for 20 pounds of goat, which is a lot. That's a lot of money. Goats do not cost that much to raise for meat, especially when you butcher them yourselves. I feel like if you're comfortable with butchering rabbits, goats is just a large rabbit. You can do it. And even then, if I were to compare the red meat that we eat here with meat that I could buy at the grocery store, which I guess the closest thing would be cow, it is cheaper to raise it here. It's cheaper to hunt here. With our meat kids, the value that those goats give us and what we don't then have to buy at the grocery store, we credit towards their mothers so that their mothers essentially are free to keep at that rate. Those babies pay their mama's way to continue living on our farm, producing milk, producing babies, and blessing our family. So I do pay out money to support our dairy goats. I go to the feed store, they get purchased feed, they get purchased hay. But when I contrast that with what the return that we get out of our dairy goat herd, our dairy goats actually don't cost us anything. And if you're interested in hearing more about how that could possibly be, I promised you I would link this video up here about how our dairy goats at least are not a money pit. I also took a video that kind of goes into the emotional cost, kind of the burnout and stress that can come with homesteading, and I'll link that down here too.